Welcome to One Word Stories, episode 24. I'm really happy to welcome a very special guest of mine, Andy Malinsky. Hi, Andy.
Hey, great to be here.
Great to host you. Andy is known to the intercultural world, but also to the diversity and inclusion world as mostly the author of Global Dexterity and also the book Reach, and as the author of many articles for Harvard Business Review. So we have talked a little bit before putting the button or clicking the button record, and Andy said, you know what? When I give interviews, when I give webinars, I'm in my comfort zone. So, Andy, I'm pretty sure you are more or less in the minority. How have you made it possible that you are in the comfort zone when you are in the spotlight?
Well, okay, so first of all, by the way, thank you for having me. I'm happy we were able to do this. I think at this point it's just purely repetition. Like having done so many webinars and podcasts, I've been a host of many of them. I've been on so many of them. I also like talking and I also teach. And so teaching is spontaneous in a lot of ways. I remember when I first started teaching 25 years ago, I would have notes. I would look at my notes and then after about 5 years, maybe 7 years or something like that, I just tossed the notes. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna just do this. And so I feel like I've been just spontaneously speaking for a very long time. And I feel comfortable doing it, especially around topics that I know something about. When you put me in a situation where I'm spontaneously speaking about something I don't know much about, then I think I'd feel more uncomfortable.
Yeah, so this is exactly our theme, stretching the comfort zone, stepping out of the comfort zone, and also, playing a little bit with the stories that we share with other people. And sometimes we share stories we are not really comfortable with, or we listen to stories that are really triggering a lot in us. How do you work with stories so that people also feel encouraged to stretch their comfort zone?
Stories are really important, I think, for me um, because they're memorable and they're a bridge for people to take ideas and concepts and to be able to incorporate them into their lives. And without stories, you might have abstract ideas and concepts, and most people don't gravitate towards those. They don't move people. They don't have an emotional concepts and ideas don't have an emotional resonance until they're integrated into a story. And in the context of a story, they become you feel something, you're moved in some way. And I think that sort of gets attached to you in a way that it wouldn't if it were more abstract. And so I always like to try to tell stories as much as possible. Um, I often tell stories. I tell stories um, that are real, and I also try to tell stories that are realistic. So stories that are real are actual stories, and then stories that are realistic are stories that might be compilations of various characters or various situations put together into a story that's realistic, but it's not an actual real story. So in that ways, it's sort of like quasi fiction, but realistic fiction.
Oh, yeah. So you are a born storyteller, as I hear.
I don't know if I am born storyteller, but I I realize the importance of doing it, and then I try to do it. I don't know if I'm so great at it. I try,
Yeah.
because I think it's important.
Yeah, definitely, yes. I still remember one of your stories you were describing in the Global Dexterity about a person who moved to the United States and struggled a lot with the authenticity challenge because whatever it was a man, he was supposed to tell other people or to present in front of other people. He really suffered under the imposter syndrome, was quite sure that he's showing off, didn't feel comfortable. And when he played by the rules from his original culture, he was simply underestimated. What to do in such a situation? Because this is also something, it's just a story of a young person, but pretty often I'm not so sure how you feel about it, but I do. When I'm writing whenever post on LinkedIn or I'm talking to someone, and really, I'm trying to have this balance between saying this and that you can await from me, however, not to push, so to say, the boundaries and say, oh, I've got something fantastic to offer.
Right. So is the question about how to sell things or how to
Yeah,
act outside your comfort zone or
yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah. Well, um, I mean, it's funny actually that you say that because I just a little while ago wrote an email to my email list. I have a list of people who have subscribed to my email list, and I wrote something that was offering various things. Um, but I always, I guess I feel a little less comfortable about it now. At first, I felt very, very uncomfortable, sort of selling anything.
Mhm.
In my first experience of it, honestly, was writing the book Global Dexterity. I had this naive impression that because I come from academics, and in academics, we're not no one has to buy our articles. Like if you write an academic article, no one, I mean, I suppose ultimately someone buys it because a library has to subscribe to a journal or something, but there's none of that. But when I first wrote the book, I remember Global Dexterity. I remember like being incredibly surprised that I had to write a blog. Like I had never written a blog in my life, an internet article. And I was surprised that they wanted me to do it. And I had no idea how to do it. And then I thought, I remember like LinkedIn, I was like, I was not on LinkedIn at all. In fact, I was talking about stories. I was talking to my brother this weekend, and he was joking about how, maybe about 10 years ago or so, I thought LinkedIn was so dumb. Like I saw no purpose for it. And so I think I just as a joke, I had like my profession is like, I don't know, I picked some random profession like farmer or something and I put it on there. And it's funny today, like I'm on LinkedIn all the time and I take it very seriously and I think it's a great tool. And I've made great like even friendships over certainly professional friendships and in collaborations and so on and so on. But it's funny because like I've come a long way. I think I've grown to learn that when you're selling something, if you really it only works if you really believe in it. If you really believe in it and you've seen, so like for instance, I have a certification program in global dexterity, certifying trainers and teachers and coaches and so on. And I remember at first it was uncomfortable to try to sell it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm selling it for this much money, but then I like started doing it and I started realizing the value that it has for people. And I also started to learn how much I actually really enjoy doing it. And so like now I have like multiple reasons to want to quote unquote sell it. First of all, I think it's a really good value for people. I think there's a lot in there and that it's really worthwhile. But also I love doing it. So like I want to like get people to do it so that I can actually be part of each cohort. So like it starts to become a little bit less, yes, of course there's some sort of selling part to it, but it doesn't feel like those things don't feel like selling to me anymore. Um, but I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a bit
Yes,
about my journey.
definitely, definitely, because this is just one of the examples, of this need to stretch the comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is one more really fascinating discussion, and I remember that it was last week when you were also talking about the experience of flow,
Mm.
that it's also actually this time when we are stretching our comfort zone.
Yeah. Oh, was that on the Siatar Southeast Asia
Yeah,
webinar?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So someone talked about flow. Uh, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist who's come up with this concept of flow. I read his book.
Me too. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, a long time ago that I read the book,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I do remember that the concept of flow is not necessarily being fully in your comfort zone. And in some ways, I
Mhm.
mean, it's hard to say. I mean, um, it's hard to really talk about this because we're talking about metaphors and metaphors. So like flow is a metaphor,
Yeah,
a comfort zone's a metaphor. What
yeah,
is, you know, so like, can you be in flow in your comfort zone? Well, can you be in one metaphor and another metaphor? I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like, because
It's about meaning,
because
I think.
what are we really saying? I think what he's saying at a simple level is that if you experience no level of anxiety, no level of arousal in a situation, probably you're not going to have that sort of drive or intrinsic interest in the situation to find yourself in a challenging but engaging experience of flow. And so you need to be somewhat outside your comfort zone, probably meaning some level of arousal, some level of anxiety, but not so much that it's overwhelming, because then you're not in flow. Then you're probably in a state of mind where you want to flee something and leave something, because if your level of arousal is so high, your driving motivation is not going to be to engage in the task. Your driving motivation, if your arousal and anxiety is so high, is to protect yourself. And how do we protect ourselves? We leave, right? So I think so flow is somewhere between like boredom and like fear. There's some level in there. And so that's what we're talking about. And you know, I was like relying on like something I read 20 years ago, and it's kind of remarkable to me. I remember it, but I think that attests to how interesting that concept is.
Definitely, definitely. And I really loved this intersection, because I can relate to it a lot. When we are talking about being in flow, it's not really being in the comfort zone. You are very, very right with this. Yeah,
Sort of. I mean,
sort of,
it depends.
exactly.
Like it depends how you define the comfort zone, right?
Yeah,
How
yeah,
narrowly you define it. It could
yeah,
be on the outskirts of your comfort zone, sort of like if you're living in a city, you know, if the core of the comfort zone is the center of the city, on the outskirts, as you get a little bit outside the city, you're still maybe in the city, but
yeah,
but so it depends on how you describe it, right? But you're right. I agree with you that like if you're fully in your um I guess if you're yeah, it's hard, it's really hard to say. It's hard to just, it's hard to say because can you not have flow in your comfort zone? I think you can, assuming that that there's some level of stretch within your comfort zone. I don't think those two things are antithetical. I think you probably can be in some degree of flow within your comfort zone, but it has to be a part of your comfort zone that is still has some stretch element to it, some bit of stretch to it.
yeah, yeah. So actually, you started to look at the comfort zone in the intercultural context,
Yeah,
and then you made it accessible to even wider audience with the second book, with Reach.
yeah.
Uh, what was your experience of stepping out of the comfort zone? What moved you actually to writing these two bestsellers?
Well, they're not bestsellers, but they're, yeah, they've done fine, but they're not like bestsellers. But anyways, what moved me to do it? Well, the first book, Global Dexterity, it was my first experience writing a book. I came from academics, and I remember this. Talk about a story. I'll tell you the story. My advisor, who his name was Richard Hackman, he passed away several years ago from lung cancer. Tragically, I'd say in his early 70s. He was brilliant, amazing guy. He was my real mentor, I would say, and he's left a big gap in my life professionally. He was my advisor at Harvard for my PhD, and he's a brilliant, brilliant social and organizational psychologist. Anyways, I was at MI, so he knew obviously about my work because he was the head of my PhD thesis plus my advisor, and this was a few years after I graduated from Harvard and after I graduated from my PhD program. I was at MIT, you know, this Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in a big auditorium. And Richard, my advisor, was giving a big talk at MIT, and he was pretty famous guy, and so the room was full. And so I was there, and before his talk, he was this crazy guy. He was like 6'5", which to our European audience, I don't know how tall that is, but he's pretty tall, like basketball player level tall.
Yeah.
And he was an eccentric guy. He used to walk around without shoes. So he would be walking around this audience before the talk with no shoes. And he was sort of like looking around the audience like this. And he saw me and he came up to me and he said, hello. And then he grabs me by the arm and he brings me across around the auditorium to this woman. And I had no idea who she was. And he says, you need to meet each other, or you need to know about his work on. Now, it wasn't global dexterity. My academic work was on something called cross-cultural code switching. That
Mhm.
was the academic work. And it's like, you need to know about cross-cultural code switching. And then he said to me, you need to know about her. She's an editor at Harvard Business Review. And then he said, then he's like, he's a little awkward, but he's funny. He's like, meet each other, something like that. And then he leaves. And then like I had this conversation with her. And then over the next year or so, we talked about the idea of making my academic research into a book. And that's how Global Dexterity was born. Um, Reach came out of, I think Reach came out of comments I got from Global Dexterity from people who had read it and said, these ideas are really interesting, but I think they go beyond just the intercultural realm. I think that what you're talking about in terms of comfort zones is something that's just, yes, of course, it's very relevant and interesting for cultural adaptation and so on, but it's relevant beyond that. And why don't you write a book about that? And I actually really liked writing Global Dexterity. I enjoyed writing the book. Like I had a fun time. A lot of authors talk about the torturous process of writing a book, and for me, it was not at all like that. I actually loved doing it,
Mhm.
and maybe that is reflected in the book. Maybe you can tell. I don't know. I really liked it, and so I wanted to write another book, and so I kicked around the idea of writing this book, and eventually it materialized into Reach. It wasn't originally called Reach. This might be the first time I've told anyone this. It was called like behavior flexing or something like that.
Yeah. So, by the way, the word rich seems to be really magic in our turbulent times right now because so many people actually had to leave or had to step out of their comfort zone, not because they wanted to try out something new or they were dreaming of a major change, but because this major change happened. And me myself, I have also classes for students at different universities, and I also saw how it impacted them. So the motivation dropped slightly. There was kind of, yeah, oh, why am I here? What should I do? I've heard also from a couple of people that many young people dropped universities in general. They couldn't really cope with the situation. Those who remained, they were really eager to do something. Nevertheless, when we had classes and we talked about the situation and the impact of COVID, it was really tough. There were really tough discussions, tough stories they shared. And this is also, the question when we experience ourselves that not only we as individuals step out of the comfort zones, but so to say, the entire groups we belong to, how does it impact us?
Gosh, it's hard to apply Reach to COVID.
Mhm.
Um, COVID was not something that was elective. It was something that was imposed on us,
Exactly. Yeah.
and there was so much trauma and stress and loss and
Mhm.
sadness and
Yeah.
frustration. I mean, emotions ranging from anxiety about what will happen to me, what will happen to people I love, what will happen to my future, to frustration, to the ideas of people being indoors and being restricted in terms of what they're able to do, to sadness and loss and people dying, and then not only people dying who but the experience of seeing people around the world suffering. And of course it's forced us outside our comfort zones in a lot of ways. I sort of feel it's hard to apply Reach necessarily to like the COVID crisis. I mean, I could see Reach being applied to specific targeted situations. Like, how do I teach a class or do a training virtually when
Mhm.
I feel it's outside my comfort zone to do that?
Yeah. Mhm.
That's a task that's been sort of, caused in some ways by the crisis. Not purely caused, because we've been doing that before COVID and after COVID and so on. But it's more of those targeted situations where I'd look at reach. But it's hard to apply it to,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Yes, there is this huge difference between having the choice and really
yeah,
being passive in the situation. Yeah, and it
yeah,
was at the very, very beginning such a shocking situation.
yeah.
And still, lots of us, we have this circle of control, and this is also something that we can decide proactively what we want to control, what we want to, yes, to do, to pursue, despite the circumstances, and what is out of reach, so to say. So this is also something that triggered my curiosity, because back to your book, also Global Dexterity, I tremendously enjoyed it because it has got a certain lightness while reading. So it's really very, very nice to read. I guess it's also because, it's with so many stories, so many examples we can relate to, that it makes also the idea of global dexterity very, very approachable. And do you think that there are also these cultural differences regarding the willingness to stretch the comfort zone?
Hmm. Cultural differences. I don't know. I suppose on some level. I mean, I suspect it's mostly driven by personality,
Mhm,
but I think that there are probably some cultural aspects to it. Like I often think I lived for a short time. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S., and I lived for a short time in California, and I taught in Los Angeles, and that's a different world, by the way. From talk about, there's a lot of heterogeneity in cultures, and the US is a huge country, and California is very different from from Boston, where I'm from. California, there's a lot of innovation in creativity in the state of California. So many startups. It's not a surprise that so many of the largest companies in the world now, and the most dynamic companies come from California. And in there's this ethos in California about, like, i- not like not like who you are in terms of like your status. There is a bit of that, but who you are in terms of your status, what schools you went to. The part of the country where I live is much more about that. It's more like European a little bit. Like, there's a little bit more of elitism, whereas in California there is not much of that at all. It's like, what do you know how to do? What can you do? What can you create? And I
mhm,
suspect that there's this sort of like, um, sort of just cultural sense of openness, in terms of like, by default, people just do step outside their comfort zone, and they do create and they do innovate, and it's part of the ethos. It's in the culture, it's in the atmosphere. Whereas that's different from where I live. Though I think on a grand scale in the US, it might be different in the US from another country, right? So it's like, so I think that there could be some atmosphere and cultural influences on that. So in another country, perhaps, where there's much less innovation. I remember, like, I lived in France, for instance. Like, there's the French culture is much more elitist. It's much more constrained in terms of innovation. It's less sort of in the. There certainly are some amazing French companies, actually, that today are created. Like, I was just reading about one the other day, by French people, though I wonder if they've actually moved to California. I don't know. uh, but that's a culture where I think that it might be more standardized, more constrained, more elitist, and so on. And I loved France, and I have a lot of friends in France. So I suspect that there are some cultural elements, but I think most of it's I think most of it's personality, actually.
yeah, yeah.
And but here's the thing. I I really want to make this point. I deeply believe that it can be learned. So like that people can learn to step outside their comfort zone. So personality is a starting point. It is not a destination. It's not an end. It's a starting point. And people, I've seen it. I've done it. That's what my books are predicated on, and also my training and coaching and all that stuff. It's like I've seen it. People can learn to step outside their cultural comfort zones. They can learn to step outside their personal comfort zones. Not in massive leaps necessarily. It's not going to happen overnight, but you can really learn it. So I want to emphasize that too.
Yeah, it takes effort. It takes effort,
Uh, and
definitely.
motivation,
Motivation, persistence, you know.
and can I just say strategy too?
Yes,
Insight, strategy. Yeah.
yes, definitely. Yes, because, when I relate to my case, coming originally from Poland, also living in Germany, and also a little bit in France, in Strasbourg, it was also, this very conscious adaptation, and it takes energy. So on one hand side, we've got this authenticity challenge, because of course in Poland, when you hear all the time, oh, take it easy, don't push too much, you don't have to say too much about yourself, wait until people see the value, and so on and so on. It works over there. It doesn't necessarily work somewhere else.
Yeah. No, it's interesting.
Yeah. When I think of, this stretching comfort zone, again, I would like to go back to our example with the COVID situation, and the title of this podcast, One Word Stories. What was actually this one word for you that helped you during these turbulent times? And what is the story behind?
Mhm. Well, I think that you had asked me to think about this, and the I didn't really think much about it because the word that popped into my mind was family.
Mm.
And I think my family um, was what really is your question about what helped me through it, or what yeah, I mean, I think that absolutely is it. I mean, we were so my wife and I have two kids. We have um, a 15-year-old, almost 15-year-old, and a 16-year-old. And by the way, I'm very thankful that my kids were not little kids, because I think it'd be really hard to have lived like this in terms of their schooling. And they were able to do a lot of online schooling quite easily because they're teenagers. And in
Mm.
fact, my son's school was in person for the entire year, but
Oh,
my daughter's was a mix. And just being with my family. Oh, and we now have two dogs. We were one of those families that got a puppy, but
okay.
we were a little crazy. This actually was really outside my comfort zone. We got a second dog, a puppy. Now, I've always had dogs. I've never had two dogs. Having two dogs was outside. It still is outside my comfort zone. But I love dogs. But I think my family is my source of motivation. It's my source of purpose. It's my um, uh, source of comfort. Sometimes it's important to be in your comfort zone, and that's my comfort zone. Um, and we spent a lot of time with each other over the year. So, uh, and then of course the extended family as well. We were able to see our extended family, not my wife's family because they live out of state, but my family is here locally, and we were able to see each other, though of course in very strange circumstances. So we had Thanksgiving dinner, which is an American, people
Yeah.
probably know about Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
a big holiday here in the U.S. And we did it in my parents' garage. So we had inside a garage in November, late November, which in Boston's cold, very cold.
Yeah.
And we were in the garage with these great photos of all of us wearing masks and these tables that were so far apart. It was I mean, really crazy, but we made it happen, and it was important to make it happen. And so I think that's the word that I would say.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. Me myself, I have also two teenagers home, and yeah, this was exactly this blessing during this time that they were this age. Definitely.
Yes, exactly. Can you imagine what it would be like for
Oh, no, I
yeah,
can't.
no, I know it's right because yeah, so no, it's true.
I just know friends' stories, yeah, and I was
Oh,
really,
me too. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I am very thankful for that. So
Lots of stories for another book, I guess.
right, exactly.
How the
Maybe,
parents
maybe.
stepped out of the comfort zones. So you have just mentioned that your two dogs make you step out of the comfort zone. Is there anything else?
Other than my dogs, there are all sorts of things that are outside my comfort zone. Um, you know, they come up periodically though. Like, at this point in my career, earlier in my career, there are many, many, many things. From giving talks to doing all the promotional stuff that we were talking about. I remember teaching was originally outside my comfort. I mean, all these things. But as you progress in your career, and if you stay in the same career, it becomes quite, I wouldn't want to say easy, but second nature in a
Yeah,
sense. So you're apt to do fewer things outside your comfort zone, but still, um, I try to stretch my comfort zone in certain ways, and I try certain things. So for instance, I tried this. I referenced it earlier. The Global Dexterity Certification Program. I had never created an online certification program about global dexterity. It's not like I knew how to do that. I created it, and so that was outside my comfort zone. Selling stuff still is, but it's kind of a necessary evil, I suppose. Um, yeah, I don't know. I have to say though, I'm not gonna lie, I think having the second dog is the thing right now that's outside my comfort zone. She's got some anxieties, and I think there are a lot of things outside her comfort zone. It's comfort zones upon comfort zones. And it's harder with a dog. You can't you know, it's
Mm-mm.
a little more difficult. So, but yeah, no, I do I really like to learn, and I really like to learn new things, and so that is by definition ultimately gonna bring you outside your comfort zone.
Definitely, definitely, yes. Is it your golden recipe also for young people, young leaders, how they can actually also step out of the comfort zone
Well,
with
I've actually
learn?
I've started becoming very interested in young professionals. I've written a couple of Harvard Business Review articles about that topic. I'm working on a new book actually now about that topic.
Right.
And I encounter them all the time because I teach them. So I'm very interested in that, and I think that's a time in life when you are definitely, where this is really important.
Yeah. So learning is one of the possibilities.
Yeah,
What else
for
for young people to step out of the comfort zone?
Well, I think it's all about motivation.
Yeah.
It's about motivation. It's about learning to customize and finding a way that fits for you. It's about nudging yourself and setting yourself up for success by picking sort of stretch situations, but
Yeah.
situations that are not in your panic zone, but in your stretch zone.
Mhm.
This is all the stuff I talk about in Reach and the training and teaching I do.
Yeah.
But you don't want to set yourself up for success, and you want to really think about it and plan it out and have a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I loved the flow of our conversation. And it was interesting to hear when you have to step out of your comfort zone.
yeah, yeah, no, it's true. Thank you for great questions and for a really interesting podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Lots of joy with your global dexterity program
Oh, thank you so much.
and all your teaching. And I'm looking forward to your new book. Fantastic.
Oh,
Take care.
great. Okay, bye bye.
Bye.